So thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm Debbie Pryor, the Artistic Programs Manager at Guildhouse. This evening I join you from the Guildhouse office in the Lion Arts Precinct in Adelaide's West End on Kaurna country, and I acknowledge First Nations people attending this talk or listening or watching the recording, and I acknowledge the rich and ongoing creative culture of the Aboriginal people. I'm very pleased to welcome you to the last event of our winter series of the reVision speaker series. This series of conversations is aimed at increasing connectivity during this ever-evolving time of disconnect, and to offer an opportunity for artists to increase their well-being and to find new models of sustainability for their practice. Before we begin, I have a little bit of housekeeping. You're welcome to ask questions at any time, and you can do so down in that little chat box. If you'd like to ask a question, just type "I'd like to ask a question," and when it comes to question time, we'll turn on your mic and you can engage with the speakers, so feel free to do that. Aside from that, please turn off your mic, as any accidental noise can be easily picked up and will come through. So I'm pleased to introduce the panel session for Tools for Advocacy and our speakers. Tonight's chair, Esther Anatolitis, is the former Executive Director of NAVA and the current Deputy Director of Collingwood Yards, and is one of Australia's leading advocates for arts, culture and the creative industry. Hi, Esther. Kelly McCluskey.
I should say I'm the Deputy Chair of Contemporary Arts Precincts, not the Deputy Director of Collingwood Yards.
Oh, my apologies. Thank you so much for correcting that. Thank you. Kelly McCluskey is the artist and co-founder of Tactical Media Art Group, PVI Collective, and a moderator for the artist-led Facebook portal Australian Artists Amid COVID-19. Makita Yuong, mid-career South Australian artist whose work unpacks her own lived experience around race, gender, sexuality and mental health, is also here with us in the Guildhouse office this evening. And Sally Blackwood is an arts leader and opera architect, a passionate campaigner for individual and community connectivity through engagement in the arts and culture. So this is such a treat for us to hear from four incredibly dedicated artists and leaders, and to gain insights into how they have fostered and nuanced their political voices, and in turn to, I guess, give us inspiration as to how to harness our own voice. So thank you all for being here. And Esther, I express my thanks to you for hosting this evening, and I pass on to you.
Thanks, Debbie, and how fantastic to be here. Hi, everyone. I am joining you from the lands of the Boonwurrung and the Woiwurrung Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I extend respects to their elders, to all First Nations people here, and particularly today being Mabo Day, a really important day in challenging and then destroying the false foundation of claimed sovereignty over this land with the end of the Terra Nullius doctrine. It's really, really great here in, as I expressed earlier, Melbourne lockdown, excuse me, to get to see you all and to get to have this really important conversation. And I've got to say, I'm pretty bloody excited to get to meet and chat with Makita, with Kelly and with Sally about Tools for Advocacy. So what we're going to do, I will kind of set the scene, I guess, with just a few ideas, a few concepts to get us thinking about the tools that we're going to unpack this evening. And then, because of their work as artists and as advocates, I'm going to pose just one broad question to each of these extraordinary people, so that we can get a sense of, I guess, those applied tools. How do artists and arts leaders work in different ways as advocates? What are the issues, the challenges? What are the second guessings and the ways in which we leap forward in really important ways? And we're going to leave as much time as we can for questions, because it's just so important to have some good discussion as we really strengthen our voices. And speaking of, something that I've been thinking about quite a fair bit lately is the relationship between art and tenacity and democracy. especially when we think about, you know, what's been in the news lately, the way that decisions are made on our behalf, the way that the arts is still not prioritised at a time when it should be, the ways in which cultural practices should be leading national agendas. But beyond the advocacy question, or before the advocacy question, the relationship between art, making art, experiencing art, the tenacity, the confidence, the courage that it gives us, the ways in which we understand and express and contest identity, the ways in which we feel and we understand different senses of agency and empowerment. Art has a phenomenal way of jolting us, sometimes in very subtle ways, but moving us to ask questions, often in new ways. Art asks new questions and demands that we do the same. And similarly, advocacy, which sounds like a complex set of political negotiations, but it is as simple as an ongoing set of conversations that centre your values, your agency and your priorities as an artist. It takes those values, that agency, those priorities, and centres them in public, in industry engagement, in the media, in political processes, and on local and national agendas. And of course, you know, there's a kind of a scaffolding kind of, you know, approach to simply a conversation or a government inquiry that you might contribute to, or responding to a journalist, or, you know, developing a campaign or an action. But of course, the more of us contributing to that civic realm in those small everyday ways, the greater the critical mass, and the more critical the cultural and political impact. So when we think about advocacy, and we're going to talk through what are kind of, you know, examples or case studies, let's listen out for what were we trying to achieve, what tools were to hand, what language and what tone would be most effective or was most effective, who was engaged, and what would success look like. And in particular, when we think about tools for advocacy, using all the tools that we have ready to hand. And I'm imagining that some of the insights this evening will be kind of realizing that the tools that Makeda or Sally or Kelly have deployed in different contexts were things, techniques, relationships, ideas, materials that were already ready to hand, that we're already almost ready to be greater, more effective advocates. And why? Let's have a look at that. Let's look at, you know, what was in that toolkit, what was drawn upon, what is something that was already there. And we do this, of course, again, to centre those values and priorities, but also so that we are creating a future together, creating a present together, where it is cultural practices that are leading political agendas, where we look across at what's going on right now and we think, yeah, I can relate to that. That aligns with my ethics and my focus and my practices. That is the world, or the Australia, that I want to be living in right now. And I know that I am actively contributing to the ideas and the decisions that matter. So let's delve into that by asking a few questions of this extraordinary group of artists. We're going to start with Makeda. The other day, with thanks to Debbie, we had, you know, a bit of a preparatory chat and thinking about, you know, just getting to know our practices and I guess drawing out what it is that we do and why. And I wanted to start by asking Makeda what it is about your orientation to your practice at the moment, which is making advocacy, I guess, you know, an important prospect and a challenge for you right now.
I think one of the biggest challenges that I've had is probably just overcoming the actual doubts that I had, really. It's like I kind of felt like I had this blockage before I even began that I had to like get over. And often it was this strange, because I've done a couple of works about a couple of different issues that are based on my personal lived experience. There were some that were about mental health, and there were some that were about my like mixed race heritage. Because my mother's family is Australian, my father's family is Vietnamese. And so I had these weird kind of blockages, like that I felt like I wasn't authentic enough. It's like, oh, you shouldn't talk about race because you're only half Asian, or you shouldn't talk about your mental health because your mental health isn't that bad compared to like the worst case scenario out there. And I kept having to tell myself and like boost myself, and also talk to my friends about this, and they would encourage me. And so I think
your friends,
yeah, like my artist friends or my arts community, and they would just go like, don't even like, just do it, just do it. And then I feel like once I actually went through the process of creating the work, that was like a catharsis. And then the work was made, it existed. And then once I had it up in the gallery, then all this kind of conversation started happening, putting it up social media, putting it on Instagram, doing the first post with, you know, the text where people could read. That was always a scary moment, and actually doing a little caption and saying, that's what this is about. You know, I was diagnosed with this mental illness, and this is what this work is about. It's my personal experience. And I guess there are these fears when you're talking about a controversial topic like race or mental health can be, that you're like, oh, I'm going to do it wrong. You know, like it feels like a bit of activism involved, but you're like, oh, maybe I'm doing the activism wrong by not, you know, doing this or being inclusive enough or that kind of thing. And there's so like a fear there that was definitely something that I had to overcome. And I feel like creating the work itself definitely really helped to boost that, but also getting feedback from people over social media, and also like people who saw the works in the flesh and were keen to contact me and tell me what they thought. So that was definitely like a barrier that I had to overcome. And I think, yeah, once that started happening, for instance, if you take this work as an example, I'm wearing one of the works I had in a solo show I had in Nexus Arts last year. This is about my mixed race heritage. So the front is the Australian flag colours, and the back is the Vietnamese flag, the South Vietnamese flag colours. And it's got all these questions people ask me about my race and like my racial appearance. So like there's, where are you from? I don't know if the text is coming up backwards.
No, it's reflecting.
Yeah, so you can read. So this was sort of about taking my lived experience and then presenting it in a way that other people could actually engage with. So I found that really interesting, and a lot of really positive feedback online, and people who were really interested contacting me about opportunities and things like that because they saw the work. And so that was really, really fantastic feedback to have. And I think that has helped me to definitely like overcome those barriers. Yeah, it's because I had a lot of people who have a similar lived experience, and they'd be like, oh, it's so incredibly relatable. It's like someone's taken part of my experience and created something that was in the flesh, hanging in a gallery they could look at. And if someone who hadn't had that lived experience at all and didn't know or think much about it, because they'd never had to experience those barriers or that experience in their life, they were learning something new. You know, it was showing them something. But I think that's one of the powerful things about artwork. It's not like people don't feel as attacked or directly called out. You know, it's something they can engage with, but like, yeah, better than kind of having, I get the feeling of that there's a lot of issues you can engage with, especially online, and you can get kind of bogged down social justice things or things that are controversial, and you know, it can make you feel like you don't know which one that you should engage with. And whereas like with artwork, I guess you can engage with it, or you can step back and absorb it, or you know, whatever you get out of it, you can get your own meaning out of it personally, and you don't necessarily have to feel like you have to jump into action straight away. Yeah, so I think that was interesting barrier to get through for me. Yeah.
Oh God, yeah, of course. I mean, that's like, you know, your whole sense of personal identity, questioning the sort of legitimacy of, do I have the right to speak? And then it's not just, you know, questioning the right to speak about a particular issue, but it's one that touches on your very identity, and then creating a work that, and, you know, now numerous works, but creating something that was going to place someone in a context where they could have that similar experience that you've just described, which is, I think, one of the most extraordinary and one of the most complex sets of tools that art, that the work of art offers us, as a kind of a place for even considering our own voice. But let's go back to that feeling of, you know, kind of tentativeness and self-doubt, because, you know, that is something that is a real threshold moment, you know, for thinking about, you know, will I create this work? Will I speak in this way? And when we look at some of the broader political and media discussion in Australia at the moment, it's not like that feeling is an invalid one. You know, we see constant attacks by, you know, an insecure, formerly dominant culture, just so afraid of losing that sense of privilege, that it's, you know, there are very real, you know, fears and concerns about consequences for speaking out. So tell us more about how it felt to know that you could draw on friends and draw on others who are going to kind of buoy you, you know, into drawing on that sense of your own voice.
I think, yeah, part of the hesitation is, yeah, there is definitely that like feeling of, oh no, someone might call me out. And then for me, then it becomes this thing of like, I have to be prepared for every, you know, I have to make sure that I've considered this and I've considered this, and I'm not, you know, like if someone comes up to me and asks me a question, which I've had that before happen. And I think that was actually a good experience. I had someone come up and ask me about a work that I'd made for a show at Urban Cow Studio, and it was about my mixed race heritage. And someone came up and said, like, how come you've got all these different symbols from different Asian cultures in one work? Like, you've got the South Vietnamese flag in there, but you also put the Japanese cherry blossom and the geisha. Like, what's that all about? And I sort of just explained and said, oh, it's actually about pseudo-Asian stereotypes, you know, placed upon Asian women. And it's about, and I just pretty much just said what I'd been, the thinking process that I'd gone through making the work. And then they were very like, oh, right, now I see, you know. So it's not like, there is definitely that fear, but if you've sort of gone through it, you, especially being an artist, I feel like, we're talking about this a little while earlier, is that like my practice is so, it can be so solitary. It could be so like you go into your workspace and you sort of have all of those ideas in your mind, like the artist brain going, and then you have to actually create the work. And I create the work myself, and it's, I don't often work with others. So then getting that like feedback is really important as well. So, you know, but if you've gone through that artist thinking process, you've already kind of thought about all of the doubts you have about the work. Like you sort of thought, you know, you're the one who spent the most time with the thing that you've created. And so you're questioning, you're like, oh, but am I reinforcing stereotypes instead of challenging them? Oh, you know, and so like that, they say you're your own worst critic, which in a way is right and in a way isn't. But yeah, it's, you know, that all that kind of doubt and the worry. And there is definitely like a fear of putting that part of yourself out there, especially if it's like your lived experience. You know, it is part of my identity and it is part of, you know, something that I have to like contemplate myself. And I think it was quite interesting because, like, for instance, with the jumper, I've got the question, am I Australian here? And the rest are like questions from other people or comments from other people, or how I respond to the questions. But people misinterpreted this question here as, are you Australian? Like, people thought that meant that people ask me, are you Australian? And that doesn't happen as often as the where are you from thing.
Yeah, right.
And I was like, no, actually, to be honest, like, see, in my artist brain, I just put it in because I was like, that's me questioning my own identity, you know. And people, I thought that was interesting that people read that in the other way, like in some of the like press write-ups, like for things they wrote that in. And I was like, that's actually not what's written on the jumper. And they were like, oh, we have to change it. And, you know, but, you know, you can put your own message in there and then your own meaning into like different bits of the work, but then there's always going to be someone who interprets it differently, and that's like part of the beauty of when people view artworks and engage with them, because everyone's got their own point of view that comes out when they view a work, which is part of the great thing about being an artist, I think. So
oh God, yeah. And knowing that you have, you know, you have set off a range of, you know, potential responses that you couldn't possibly imagine. And I think that is, yeah, that's a gift and a challenge. And one of the, I think it's fundamental to any consideration of putting something in the public realm. And kind of leads me on to asking Kelly some questions. Thank you, Makita. And I hope everyone's starting to think of your questions for Makita, because there's so much to ask in what she just described. Now, Kelly, we just talked about self-doubt and a bit of, you know, that need for a self-care approach, but also about the complexity of what is put out into the public realm. This, of course, is the very definition of the scope of practice of PVI. Can you tell us a bit about what PVI is up to lately? And I guess, you know, for you, what that choice was to devote your practice to a set of engagements that are not just inspiring people to ask questions in different ways, but to get extremely politically active and civic minded.
Wow, okay. Bam, bam, 2 questions in one.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So actually, just stepping back a bit, because you mentioned earlier about what are our tools for advocacy.
Yes.
And just Debbie with the intro, she mentioned Tactical Media Art Group, which is how we describe ourselves. But I did want to say that to the term tactical media came from Critical Art Ensemble, who talk about by any media necessary, like those are the tools available, any media necessary, by whatever you can get your hands on. And I kind of feel like we lean into that. But yes, what have we been up to lately? We've been making a participatory, well, I would think it's more of a collaborative work with audiences called Tiny Revolutions. And it's looking at, it's an exercise in shared power, whereby we all assemble all together. Just picture a kind of Russian Revolution meets kind of like the UN. So lots of big round tables and speakers and mics, but heavy flags hanging down. And it's all about, there are apparently 15 global challenges that we face, that humanity faces at the moment, according to a group of futurists called the Millennium Project, who were brought in by the UN in the late 70s to look at what is the future of humanity. Anyway, so they've come up with these 15 global issues, and it's, as you would expect, it's things like climate crisis, it's status of women, it's democracy, it's health, it's wealth inequality, all of these things. I think we were thinking at the time when we were making the work that we were so overwhelmed with the sheer scale of everything that we have to try to fight for towards, that how do we take these massive issues and make them more bite-sized, and so that we can digest it, not just ourselves but with our audiences. And so I guess that was the idea for Tiny Revolutions, is that we invite members of the public to submit in a nutshell, what keeps them awake at night. And then they select one of the 15 global challenges that relate to that. We receive that submission, it comes through online. They also select a creative tactic for us to deploy. Wearables is one, Makita. So, which is, tactics like a hoax or a subvertisement or things like that, creative tactics that we can play with. And that submission comes through to our think tank, where audiences gather around all of these tables that I spoke about, and we start the timer and we give ourselves 60 minutes to debate what we know about the issue, to devise an idea in relation to what's been submitted. And we then have a ballot at the end as to which table's idea is going to be taken forward to the do week, where we actually do that action in the public realm on behalf of that person who submitted their issue. So it kind of comes full circle. So that's kind of what we've been working on, and it's been I've only just finished it last week, so it's still very fresh in my mind as a kind of experiment in participatory democracy / meets performance / plays with Russian Revolution thematics. But so it's been very exciting. We work with local artists on the ground. We reach out into their networks and their communities to go and help us to achieve the do's. And those do's end up being documented and they come back onto the Tiny Revolutions website, which is what we're working on at the moment. So it's really great. We have lots of toasts of vodka in the think sessions. It's very lively, it gets very rowdy once people kind of start to calm down and realize that everyone has a voice. This is a shared space. It's a space where we can give ourselves permission to be inarticulate and not expert in climate crisis or ethics or democracy, but we know how we feel about it and we can talk about our experiences of it. So I guess once those barriers come down, the conversations begin, and then this amazing creative little nugget comes out at the end of the 60 minutes from that time pressure of kind of the action we have to go and do. So that's pretty much that work. And the other question, thanks, Esther. And I've forgotten what the other question was.
Oh, that's okay, because I can. That instantly makes me think of what you just described and the way that everyone participates, plays, throws themselves into that. There would have been so many of those little moments and overcoming of little moments of self-doubt or tentativeness, or looking for that voice. So just as Makita was describing as earlier on in her practice, you would see that again and again as people have that little aha moment of going, okay, this is a step that I can take. What is that like?
Yeah. It's kind of magic. I mean, the way that we use gameplay a lot in our practice, and what that does is it actually levels the playing field between an audience and a performer to some degree, because what it kind of everybody can most people can understand and find the idea of a game accessible, and it immediately locates your brain in an area of kind of play and experimentation, and it's like, okay, we're going to play a game. There's safety in that. So I think over the years for us, it's been looking at ways in which we can kind of work with the idea of gameplay, but slam it into, really difficult subject matter and difficult issues. And so that our audience members are kind of navigating their way through perhaps difficult content, but in a really fun way. So, and yes, over the years, I think with live audiences, you constantly, whenever you say the word participation, people panic and immediately think of this worst case scenario, like the spotlight's going to go on them and it's, something horrible is going to happen. And so it's kind of taking some of that away, trying to strip that out and go, that it doesn't have to be like that. We're all in this together. Let's have some fun with it. And yeah.
Oh, precisely, because that's the thing, you know, if that kind of civic engagement or advocacy were only up to one person, it would be absolutely terrifying for that one person. But to see through the platform of a game, not only that a complex system can be mastered, but that also there can actually be some fun and delight and joy and satisfied curiosity and so on in it, I think is, yeah, the really, really important insight. Which leads me on to a question for Sally. And again, everyone, please, I'm sure you've got lots of questions for Kelly, so either add them to the chat or, you know, we will talk more in a little bit. Sally, that sense of, I guess, navigating through a complex system, a game, that sense of the individual versus the broader kind of system or institution. So your recent advocacy has been really kind of in that zooming out sense, looking at the role of the institution, the industry or political power that it can wield, and the impact that individuals can have in kind of shifting that sense of power and shifting agendas for advocacy. Tell us about one of your recent adventures in that space as an opera architect.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to Makita and Kelly. I'm calling in from Gamilaroi country, and I'm in a regional area. And I just want to say that because I think it's really important that we all have voices across Australia, across the world, and we don't have to be in a city to make a stand and to find advocacy and to find our networks that are now connected via Zoom, connected via, you know, digital medium. It's very easy, and it's a wonderful thing that we can all kind of stand together in that way.
Yeah.
It's really incredibly important. And I just wanted to pick up, if I may, with something Makita mentioned and was carried on, this idea of fear. Before you step in, I was terrified. I can't express more how extraordinarily terrified I was to make a stand against, and I'm talking about opera, so within an area that I work in, and to make a stand against people or against systemic change that needed to happen. Absolutely terrifying. So the fear doesn't stop you. It shouldn't stop you when you realise that actually I couldn't not act, and that was really, really important. And it's not about me. It went from an event that happened, and this is in 2019. And the event then escalated into something that, hang on, this is something that is beyond us in this little event. It's beyond me, and it's certainly a public conversation, which then becomes part of what you're talking about, Esther, in terms of democracy. It becomes part of something that's much, much bigger than us. And therefore, how can my voice, and I really love when, Makita, when you're talking about your lived experience and being able to legitimise that. And for me, it wasn't just legitimising my lived experience, but the lived experience of young composers, female composers who I was surrounded by, who at that time were told their voices were not welcome in the operatic field. And it was incredibly important for me to then take that and step up. But I didn't do it by myself. And I think that's really important. I did lead it, but I had a really core team of people around me. And I think in terms of tools of advocacy, people, the people that you trust, this core group of people who are absolutely intrinsic in making change is so, so important. Trust, absolutely trusting. And then looking at how best to platform voices. At that particular moment, there was no point in Sally Blackwood stamping her feet and yelling. That wasn't going to cut across. That was not a strategic move in any way. But what was to talk with a group of people, to be on the phone, to be texting people, to be working out what other people want, what's going on. And when this was really palpable that change needed to happen in terms of gender equity and diversity in opera, that's been building for a very long time, and we are standing on the shoulders of women that have come before us that have forged so much already. And we just happen to be here at the right time to suddenly flick us a bit of a switch. But to come and then work out our core team, and to also then be able to strategically work out that the first step on our plan was not our voices, but it was a voice of media to speak out first. And I think that's incredibly important. Someone we trusted, and Alison Croggan wrote an incredible article, which then from the back of that, we could write a call to action. From the back of that, other articles came out, longer, more in-depth articles. That was really important. So on the back of her being able to write and platform, then we were able to garner 200 plus voices in 24 hours from our call to action through Arts Hub, which was then calling for 7 different demands, if you like, for systemic change. I won't go through all of them, but I will say the last one was we call for those in leadership to back us, and the act of hearing to be prioritised alongside that of speaking. And I think that was really core. We were looking at shifting the way in which opera artists are treated, the way they're seen, the way stories that are told on the operatic stage in terms of violence against women is being perpetuated. It's many layered, and it was incredibly important. But that listening was something that really started to trigger what was going on. And from there, we were able to have much bigger conversations. So this happened, it's then that bigger networks, people sharing overseas, that was shared thousands of times. I didn't have to do all of that. My cohort of 4 women altogether didn't have to do all of that. It was trusting that our voice, and I love, Esther, when you're talking about centering the voice, and that's incredibly important, was being taken out there to the point where we then could sit down with the Australia Council and get the Australia Council then to lead, to do the heavy lifting for the next stages. So the Australia Council, the Australian Centre for Music, APRA AMCOS, then organised an opera summit at the end of 2019. So that was from April to December. What was done was extraordinary. And we were about to leap off in the 220, but we all know what 220 did. So, and that's also important, when to speak and when to wait, because it was not the time in 2020 when everyone was losing their jobs to suddenly keep talking about women in opera. That's not the time. And so we're waiting till the right time.
What you just outlined, and thanks so much, Sally, for taking us through all that detail, was what you just outlined is a really sophisticated approach to a campaign, although I imagine it didn't always feel like it at the time, because you didn't kind of stop back and think, yes, I'm going to plan a multi-month kind of, and step 1 will be this and step 2 will be that. But I think it's a brilliant example of using a range of tools that are ready to hand, but also, and it kind of zooms out on the experience that Makita described about an artist feeling a sense that you're sort of standing at that interstice of about to express yourself and your identity in a different way and engage people in that conversation, and then zooming out to what Kelly described, a platform, a game, a set of challenges that kind of embody for people that the sense of taking that next leap and enjoying it. What you just described, as we saw in one of the little slides I threw up earlier, is using, I guess, a range of different tools for different purposes. And so, for example, when Sally described going to the media, we go to the media for a number of reasons, don't we? We've kind of, there's a conversation that's happening within the industry. But when we go to the media, we want to reach a different audience, and we also want to jolt institutions into action. So tell us all what that meant for you to be explicitly pursuing a public approach through the media, knowing the impact that would have on an institution, particularly on its board.
Absolutely. I think it was really important. I do think it's important to choose who you speak to, who you entrust your voice to. That's absolutely integral. And
yes, there's media, and then there's, who you trust your voice to is vital.
And look, I've learned so much through this. My women that I was working with, Lisa Lim, Peggy Polias, Brie Van Ryk, the four of us worked together. And Lisa was really a core person for me to bounce these ideas off, and really taught me so much about, one, sticking to our issues, not engaging in every public conversation that involved equity and diversity, or bigger conversations about violence against women, where that was absolutely important, but at that moment was not the issue. So that we didn't get drawn into these big, unwieldy conversations, which is really easy to do, and media can put you off very, very quickly. So we trusted our voice to Alison Croggan in the beginning, and then later on we were asked to do other articles and write other things, and it was very much about making sure our voice was first and foremost. So Jo Litson was fantastic at Limelight. There were just really great people who were behind us. And I think that was incredibly important. There were some articles I refused to do because of the background of the particular media person. There were some, because I knew that the story would be twisted. And look, it was interesting in a couple of instances where we didn't participate, the story was twisted. So it's finding that ground, I think. But there came a moment where we realised that this was a public issue, and it was an issue about women in general, and women and violence, and women whose voices weren't being heard, who were, not wanting to participate in any level of their art form because they weren't being heard, because they were being squashed and stifled. That's a really big issue. That's way beyond the people that came to this particular Catalyst conference. I think what was also really important was not blaming and not talking about the incident that happened, but rather what are our tools for going forward. And that was really, really crucial, because otherwise you get stuck in playing a blame game, which doesn't actually help anybody. It doesn't progress. It doesn't help the art form. And that was really key to making sure that we didn't, when the media asked about that, or that we kept moving it forward into what's
it's a really crucial observation, because of course, it's important when you're onto a substantial advocacy campaign approach. It's very important to use the media so that we're not just speaking to ourselves, we're enlisting others, and we're also making it clear to the people that we're more directly advocating to that we recognise and we assert this as being in the public interest and of public importance. But as soon as something goes out into the media, we do lose control of the narrative. And so having to choose the tone, the voice is very important. I mean, you mentioned earlier, Sally, thinking about the appropriate times that, the height of the pandemic and its health impacts and its impacts on people's jobs wasn't then the time to continue that approach. And, it's been a mind of last year looking at facilitating national advocacy approaches for the entire industry on COVID, that I was really mindful at the very, very outset that we needed a frame that was actually very strongly generically public, which is how I came up with Create Australia's Future as a sort of a theme and a hashtag and an advocacy approach for a whole lot of the media and supporting artists to speak out, so that we were really talking about something that was something that people could relate to without coming across as, you know, why are whingy artists speaking up? And I'm just seeing in the chat that Cynthia Schwarzstick has noted that it's this still prevalent feature of women to be questioning their voice, our voice, if it is relevant. Cynthia says she so much relates to that, and it keeps coming up and works as a big blockage. And we're certainly seeing, aren't we, and now question for Kelly and for Makita as well. And please, everyone, do throw your questions into the chat, or as Debbie has said, let us know, just type in, I would like to ask a question, if you'd like to ask one, because we're heading into our last minutes. So yes, that sense that as, you know, new and next waves of feminism hit us, there is just, you know, more and more kind of virulent, violent, misogynist approaches out there that we need to counter. Makita, how much of this is still an ever-pressing daily thing for you, that kind of self-doubt of your voice, and or as a woman?
I think it really the whole self-doubt thing really intersects with like the barriers that I have, for instance, having like living with a mental illness that I have to manage, and like, you know, I treat that and I manage that, and I, you know, like, you know, it's a medical thing. And making artwork about that was like really cathartic, but it's just things like, for instance, taking self-doubt, and then, you know, if you add that into the mix, where if you're not having a great mental health day, that can be extremely difficult to get through. You know, like, I think sure that anyone who's had struggle with like anxiety or depression can probably relate, you know, to the negative feelings that can happen there. So like, you know, and also like there is the, you know, questioning yourself. I think because people, yeah, when people have questioned you all your life about who and what you are, that can really kind of, you know, come through in ways that you just completely don't expect.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah, like, you know, for instance, like a lot of these questions, if I'm remembering this stuff from childhood, from high school, this is from memory, like this is things that have stuck in my mind. And like, I think when I was creating the work and when I was first showing it, I really didn't want to come off as being like angry or, you know, like being this really heavy thing. I was just like, well, this is just what people say to me. And honestly, I think some of it's funny, and I think some of it's weird, and I think some of it's everyone's going to have a different reaction to it. Like from your, it's so relatable from like a lot of other people of color and stuff, immigrants, second or third generation immigrants. And, you know, from, oh my God, people say that stuff to you, you know, that's awful. Or people going, is that offensive to ask you where you're from? So like all of it, like I got a few different reactions, which was really like good to talk about with people, because I really like to engage with all of that. And, you know, as well, it also like with that kind of advocacy, especially when it's coming from like the lived experiences like Sally was talking about, you know, it then becomes about you thinking about your lived experience, like in this way that you're dredging stuff up. And yeah, like for instance, there's a lot of emotions happening to me, like when I made this work about my actual father's life as an immigrant from Vietnam. He, as a child, he like, you know, he witnessed the Vietnam War was happening when he was a child, and then he experienced post-war Vietnam, and then he came here, you know, and it's like, I've been really, really interested in seeing any other artists who are keen to like talk about their immigrant experience and who have a different angle on it, a completely different angle on it. To me, it's a different context because like the country is different or their background's different, but at the same time there's these parallels that I get when I read about them and their work and when I read interviews, and I feel like I can connect to all of it. But also there's of course the difference, but you know, that kind of helps you to get rid of your self-doubt. If you're just kind of alone in your own thinking, doing a lot of research can also help you to feel less self-doubt. And you also learn that other people have had those doubts and they've gotten past it, or they've shoved it aside and gone, no, I'm going to do this. And yeah, I guess when you're talking about, the question was about like, oh, women doubting themselves. It's like, it seems to be like, there's a lot of stuff about stuff like imposter syndrome and things like that. And like women in the workplace, like how if you're working in an office with like women and men, how you can overcome your own like doubts about how capable you are. But when it comes to women, they'll just keep doing the job. They'll just keep doing the job and being so capable. And, you know, like as also advocating for other women, and then the doubts are still there in their minds, but they just keep doing it.
Yeah, and there's just, you know, there is so much there that's structural or deliberate that is that exacerbates those doubts, which is why it's so important, as you were saying, to draw on one another, to do that research. Cynthia's saying she also gets asked where she comes from because her accent is weird, but her otherness is not visual, but still present.
Oh yeah, the accents, yeah.
Yeah.
Like people do get asked.
Yeah, I think I certainly suffered a lot more racism when I was younger, but yeah, my family also come from a traumatized war-torn background, and it is something that stays alongside you and doesn't leave. And certainly for me, it's a motivation towards, you know, greater civic and political engagement. We have got a few questions coming in now, so I'm just going to work through these. It is 5 minutes before we're due to wind up. We might go for an eensy-weensy bit longer because there's clearly lots here to talk about. Now, Debbie's saying, outside of your individual arts practices, do you use your own personal platforms for wider social issues or advocacy, and how do you conduct yourself in that space? Kelly, let's ask you that question, and I guess for everyone, we know we won't get to ask everyone all the questions, or we will be here for all evening, so we're going to do a bit of kind of cycling through, but Kelly mentioned earlier the big Facebook group of artists, but then also using social media in different ways. So how do you juggle, I guess, the personal, you know, social media began as a place to be social, and it can be such a horrifically, you know, kind of unsafe space as well, but it's also a great opportunity.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a great question. I mean, I think for us, for PVI Collective, we are a collective of artists. So I think that there's an identity that's hopefully attached to that art group as its own thing, and I'm a member of that art group. But I am also an individual who has a degree of autonomy. So even though I may agree with, you know, pretty much everything PVI is doing, I do have my own points of view on other things. And I think that I think there have been situations, and just going back to Sally's amazing points, when you know, advocacy that you're doing or artworks that you're making hit you know, controversy, or kind of go in a way that's unexpected, that then you know, you can find yourself on the back foot and having that finger pointed right at you. And I think that you know, when people do associate you with, you know, another organization, that you become the face of that organization, even though there's lots of other people. Like you were saying, Sally, there's lots of other people, it wasn't just you. So I don't quite know what the answer is, other than to kind of distinguish the difference, for you to be able to distinguish the difference between your voice and the voice of your artwork, even, or the voice of the company or the organization that you're working within.
I think that's a good response. And also, I guess, for those who don't have that organisation or institution, I think it's, just really taking the time to consider your personal choice. Do you want to engage with social media, and then how do you want to make it work for you? Because it's not I think it's again, it's a possibility but not an inevitability, and it can be challenging, but it can also be a great opportunity. Now our next question comes from Emma Faye.
Thank you so much, Esther. And I just have to say, I'm loving this conversation so much. It's a topic very close to my heart. One of the challenges I observe in conversations with artists and with colleagues, especially those that haven't necessarily took to the stage or took to a podium or a platform in many ways, is actually how they articulate what they want to happen in very specific terms, or how they want it to take place. Especially when the weight of the world can feel very large, and so it can be a very heavy role to try and discern the what and the how. I just wondered if maybe one or two of the panelists could speak about some of the specific ways. We talk about tools. What are the tools you use to define that and distill it? And I, of course, credit to PVI for that amazing way you do that collaboratively. And I was Rebel Emma at the Tiny Revolutions the other day, and I really appreciated that. So I just thought I won't take up too much time asking my question. I would love to hear some comments on that. Thank you.
Emma, thank you. Sally, let's go to you. That sense of how do you kind of decide
the what and the how. That's fantastic. I mean, we were very clear about it's about structural and systemic change. So it's about big reform, which isn't going to happen overnight, but that we're chipping away at it. And I think what Esther alluded to at the very beginning, that this is a conversation and it's an ongoing conversation, is really important in terms of having that wide-reaching conversation, and us not having to have the answers today. But that's not letting go of it entirely. That's not a cop-out at the same time. I think it's a conversation that also stretches into the past, that we're gathering everything we've got from the past and building on it. I know for me, it's about being clear, as we did in our call to action, was writing down 7 points. So if you want to have a look at that, Opera and the Doing of Women, it's got 7 specific points, and we discussed that amongst ourselves, and that was something that was really clear that we wanted to achieve. So we've got something therefore to go back to. The how, I love that PVI does it in a really playful way, and it's a very inclusive kind of creative space, and I think that's a really gentle, beautiful approach. Our approach was a little bit different in terms of this was much more talking about profiling what was going on, how things needed to change in the media, and then getting hold of that. How, it's about people sharing it, it's about people participating in the conversation. It was really important that the call to action had people as co-signatories, and the fact that we got over 200 people in a couple of days was amazing. Well, in the first 24 hours, actually, we got most of them, which was incredible. It also was very much about then when institutions wanted to co-sign, I was like, well, what are you co-signing to? And they had to be really strategic conversations about, okay, that's great, you want to do that. What are you actually committing to? So we had another tier that said, if you're an institution and you're signing this, you're signing because you are saying that you are going to come up with a letter that's going to come out in the next 6 months or so, describing exactly what you're going to do. What are the steps that you're going to take to meet these 7 demands? So being really clear about that. As I said, it's about whose voice is being taken by the media. So being really clear that that's the same across, that we all are standing and saying the same thing in different ways. But it's also about different people can take on those voices. I mean, I was asked to be on a panel in Brisbane And I looked at the panel, and the panel was made up of all white women. And I thought, I don't need my voice to be here. This is not, I need to step back for other people to be part of this. And because of that, they had a much more diverse panel and a much better way of articulating the changes that needed to happen. And I think that's really important, looking at my place and when my voice is useful and when it's not, which you know, in performative terms, it's like, when am I holding space and when can I actually step back and let other people hold that space in a much better way?
Yeah.
And whose voice is in the room? You know, whose voice is in the room and whose isn't in the room? And that's incredibly important. So picking up that gauntlet and running with it until such time as there is a critical mass, but also there are lots of other voices in the room that need to come out.
And being able to take such a comprehensive approach because of identifying all those different modes is just such a strength. We have got one last question, and then we're going to have to wrap it up and work out how we're each going to look at our own toolkits and make our own commitments to continue to be great advocates. So the last question is from Michelle Lee. What is your recommendation to tackle political issues in your artwork that could have you detained in a different country? Can one create work but still remain anonymous and have the work on show? So question for, I think, well, Nikita and Kelly, whoever would like to leap into this one, because it's kind of a, you know, we have, it's a funny country, Australia, you know, we're kind of adventurous and, you know, larrikin and whatever, all that kind of, you know, Anzac myth nonsense is, and then we're also quite conservative and we can support environments where artists can present work that in other countries would be quite dangerous, but then we've got politicians who'll jump on the most benign kinds of things. Now, Kelly just had her hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Esther. Terrific question. I mean, I think in response to Michelle, I think from our perspective, the more overtly political work and artwork is, the less impactful it is. Because
interesting.
So for us, it's about a degree of subterfuge and kind of, you know, working with gameplay, working with performance, working with participation and audiences, and actually not making it as obvious as perhaps it could be if it was a campaign, for example. The other thing I wanted to raise in terms of kind of empowering yourself or protecting yourself is for this project, Tiny Revolutions, after we'd gotten everybody's ideas and we're ready to go and do them on the streets, we had to lawyer up. We call it lawyering up. We literally have a lawyer for the project who's an enabling ex-board member of PVI, understands our work and basically looks at all the ideas, all the actions we want to do in public space and say, not say don't do that, it's illegal, but say here's how you get around this and these are the laws you need to know about. And so through understanding some of those legal parameters, we're able to kind of work our way in and out of it. I don't think that fully answers, but that just jumped into my head to mention.
Oh yeah, because, you know, there's that old adage of, you know, you've got to master the rules to break them, and being very aware of the legal limits and loopholes is extremely important. And Nikita, what about for you? I mean, in that sense of artwork that really directly tackles either political or identity questions, do you often kind of, you know, look across the various aspects of your identity, cultural identity and family heritage, and think about, you know, what if this work were presented in one of those countries or contexts?
There was the work where I stitched the hammer and sickle onto like this little flag thing and then put like a sales quote on it. I mean, that was like, I'm pretty sure that in actual Vietnam, like I'm sure there's not much pro-Marxist sentiment at all, because, you know, they have like the communist regime after the Vietnam War, and my dad is not keen on communism at all. And that's kind of what that work is about. It's about how I know a lot of like young leftist people who are like kind of into Marxism, and I might kind of have ideals that are leaning that way, but then my dad would just really, like I said to him, what was it like living in like the communist regime? And he would just be like, oh, there was awful things, there was so much horrible stuff. And then he would tell me some of the stuff, and it would be like, you know, but I think like it's hard to know, because I think with that particular question, can one create work but still remain anonymous and have the work on show? And I'm trying to think of ways you could like do that, but I probably don't have enough knowledge in this area. So like consult with like wherever you want to work with, like if it's at a gallery, maybe be like, can I be anonymous? Can you just like put the work up there and maybe totally anonymous, and they can protect my identity or something? Because I don't know exactly what the legal stuff is. Like it's hard to know without the context. You know, like if it's a work that's offensive in your home country, and because I have like Australian, I was born here, so I have Australian citizenship, so it's not like it's a way in which I am privileged. I can just, you know, don't have to worry about that. But yeah, that's where that divide kind of intersects, where you yeah, Australia being that conservative country, and it's like you've got to navigate that, and the fact that yeah, there are like terrible like consequences for certain things, that is a real genuine fear. And a lot of more privileged Australians have absolutely no idea. Like they think it's all cool, they think it's all good. We're a multicultural country, we're like accepting of everyone, we give everyone a fair go, but it's like, this is people's lives. Like they, you know, like this is what happens to certain people who are from different places. This is how like that can intersect when you've come from one culture or one country, with the possible trauma that comes from that, and then you're trying to survive in this new country, or you know, and you want to share your experience, but there's like a real fear there, because yeah, not just because you have the memory. Like for instance, I've been hearing a little bit about, it's a very heavy topic, very heavy, intergenerational trauma. And then I've been thinking, what if my dad's experiences in Vietnam, you know, affecting me? Because I just kind of pushed that away for a lot of my life. And so, you know, because you think about your parents' lives, and that's real stuff that impacts you, because they raised you, this person going through an experience, and they have that life experience, and they raised you with that informing them.
Yeah,
you know, that's what.
Yeah. My sister and I talk about that a lot, given the circumstances in which my parents were raised, and then it eventually came here, and I think it's very real. And it never ceases to shock me that you know, Australian kids in schools are not taught, you know, the modern histories and modern political histories of the countries that, well, first of all, of the first peoples of Australia, and secondly, the countries from which our parents and also many of us have come, because these are not only the stories of, you know, this nation, but they are the intergenerational traumas that affect or constrain us. And yeah, they do take massive negotiating. And I guess there are also ways in which, you know, really drawing on our cultural heritage in different ways can mobilize and inspire us to engage politically. You know, for those of us who come from the, you know, those more politically unstable countries, it's often more of an everyday conversation. That sense of what are you doing? Who do you vote for? What's your position on a particular issue? These are normal conversations in, you know, generally all of the non-English speaking world, and you know, are an important part of kind of everyday civic culture. And so it's up to all of us to think about how we transform the everyday civic culture of Australia, either in very small ways by continuing to develop our practice, to talk about it, to present it in different ways, or to think about making that personal choice of the kinds of issues that we want to engage with and how. And I guess really, you know, I talked briefly earlier about the notion of creating Australia's future together. I think it's also important for all of us to take that time to make that personal choice about how do I engage politically, to what extent, where and how am I comfortable, and when will I review this important decision, and think about the next stage and the people that we draw on and the ideas that we make sure are central to Australia's future. So before handing back over to Debbie, I just wanted to give enormous thanks to Makita and to Kelly and to Sally. There is a lot more chat that is happening, and I see we've got a lot of similar cultural backgrounds and issues to share and to draw upon and to be empowered by. A big thank you to Guildhouse for entrusting me with this important conversation, yeah, let's change the nation. Back to you, Debbie.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us today. And the speakers, it's been so great to hear from you and to talk with you about such personal and powerful issues. So I really appreciate your vulnerability and for really sharing so much of yourself. It's been inspiring, but it's also been incredibly practical, which I think is a really fitting way to end this season. So thank you so much, Esther, Kelly, Makita, and Sally. Round of applause. And thank you so much to the audience for being here. And we will circulate a survey, and I would genuinely love to know how you felt about this session and about this season. What you've told us so far throughout the last 4 seasons has really helped shape what you see today. And as we change the model of revision, we really want to know what you want to see from us. And as our model changes, you can also support us by supporting our current annual appeal, and all donations will be doubled thanks to the City of Adelaide match funding, which is a really important way forward for us post grant funding. So really thank you so much. Thanks again to all the speakers. See you all again soon. Good night.